Okay.
One more thing, and yes.
Oh,
Very
do your microphone.
good.
Okay, just a little cleanup on our last project. We wrote a check to me for cash because that's the only way the pizza place would take it. I also used it to buy food at Walmart, such as salad and so forth. That was $207.33.
I don't know why it's, usually, the Friday classes, they don't sneak up on me, but it seemed like, wow, it would seem like we just had a class. And this week, I don't know if it was because of the holidays or, preparing for my kids to come out, grandkids to come out or whatever. It was like, I couldn't remember. I mean, I had my notes prepared, but I mean, for this, but I couldn't remember what we had talked about last week and what the flow, of it, was, like that. So that's why I was watching the video again from last week, and that's when I saw Howard raising his red folder about the sound. But I just wanted to get that flow going again. I had brought up about a Christmas message about, Christ has come into the world to save sinners, and that brought up Larry's visit to the Creation Museum and Noah's Ark and that. And then we talked about the importance of the message. When we talk to people, we got to bring them to Christ. We can't just bring them to the Bible's a good story, or you can't even bring them to a theistic God. You have to bring them to, and we talked quite a bit about that. I mean, it was a good conversation. And, we talked about being able to answer questions. And then we started into the study because that, between what we talked about with the rib dinner last week and with that, it kind of shortened, the rest thing. But we talked about, we're in Revelation 6:12-17, which I'll have Carl read in a second. But we talked about a little bit, does Jesus judge people? Does Jesus judge people? And did he warn the people that he would judge them? And has the Bible done that in the past? And I think the conversation went that Jesus judges people. And what I want to do is I want to get into Matthew 24 some, where we'll see, we'll see some of that. But that's the way that flow went. So Carl, I had to read last week. I had to pass out mics. I mean, I'm docking your pay. Anyway, get close to the microphone so everybody will hear.
I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to the earth, as late figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The sky receded like a scroll, rolling up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and every slave and every free man hid in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand?
Okay, very good. So, the conversation was, and I think I said this last week, you can hold your own views on end times or what this is talking about and stuff like that. I take a particular view that this is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. And we talk on this one sheet where it says comparisons, let's say comparison of Jesus judging Jerusalem and the temple versus Revelation 6. And what we had on here was, we talked about, we'd gotten into this generation. When Jesus is talking to this generation, which generation is he talking to? And then my point was that those who hold to this generation refers to the end of all times and the destruction of this world and before the coming of the new heavens and the new earth. They're not talking about this generation. They're talking, I think I teased about this last week. They're talking about this generation over there, not this generation, that's here. And so we went through, some of these verses where Jesus is going through from chapters 21 of Matthew through 24, 25, and he's doing different kinds of pronouncements of, woes. I mean, when he talks about that stuff, but in Matthew 23, he talks about, and I don't know if we mentioned this, he talks about the pronouncement of the 7 woes on the Jewish leadership, and it says, but woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. But it goes on like that, 7 different times. And all of them end up with this generation. All these things will come upon this generation. And he says in verse 36 there, truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. And then at the end of 23, he's just as the leaders, now he's pronouncing judgment over the whole the whole Israel, the whole Jerusalem population, when he says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her, how often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left you desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord." And the key verse there is in 38, where he says, your house is left desolate. And what's their house? The temple. Yeah, and so he's doing that judgment that then he gets into Matthew 24, and that's where, and some of that'll be, familiar. I just wanted to kind of read through it, but the language that he uses, this is the second sheet that I handed out. I just have to find it. Remember I talked last week about Bertrand Russell, the atheist philosopher, when he was saying one of the reasons he was an atheist was because people weren't taken, like Matthew 16, where it said this generation, seriously, where he says, well, it sounds like those people were expecting it, but you guys are saying it's out here. So Jesus must not have told the truth when he said, this generation. So let me get my, in Matthew 24, and you can turn to Matthew 24 if you want to read along. He says, Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them and said, you see all these things? Do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be torn down. Okay? And we know that's what happened, because all you got to do is, read history and go to the Temple Mount and see that there's nothing left there. So that happened. So
was the west wall considered to be part of the
no, not part of the temple. It's part of the walled city. Yeah, surrounding. Yeah. Okay. He says, as he sat on the mount, verse 3, he says, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, see, now this is the thing. They come to him privately. We see this several times in the Gospels. Jesus is talking to a crowd, and then he goes away, and then the disciples come to him and say, what you talking about? That's what they say. They go, what the heck were you talking about back there? These guys have been traveling with them, like that. So, because Jesus isn't the clearest, don't get this wrong. He's not the clearest speaker. He speaks in parables. He speaks in metaphors. Just the whole thing, and in the parables in Matthew 13, when he does the parable of the sower, you know, and then they come to him after he does it publicly. They come to him and they go, you know, what's up? So he explains it to them. And then I forget how it goes, but they say something to the effect, why don't you speak more clearly? I don't think he said it, but he said that he speaks in the parables to hide it from people, to hide the truth from people. You know, I mean, you go read in Matthew 13, he basically said that his message isn't for everybody. You know, and that goes back to the Matthew 7 thing of don't cast your pearls before swine. You know, you have hardcore unbelievers, don't bother with them. You know, if they come around, then you can explain it to them. You know, that's the 1 Peter 3:15 thing, you know, about witnessing for your faith, where he says, should someone ask you, you know, then tell them. So, you know, this is the kind of stuff that goes on. So when they come to him and they say, okay, they come to him privately here in verse 3, and he says, he sat on the Mount of Olives. The disciples came to him privately saying, tell us when all these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age. And I think the end of the age is important because, and it's a different word in the Greek than world. See, because I think the King James, I don't know if anybody's looking at the King James here, but in the King James it says, and tell us of your coming and the end of the world. And they mistranslated it. And that's why people, I think, and King James, big, powerful Bible, around a long time, you know, around, you know, what, 300 years before other people started making Bibles. So everybody's got this in their head that they're asking, when's the end of the world? When the word is, when's the end of this age? And what is this current age? The Old Testament age. That's what they were living. The new age and the age to come is New Testament era. Okay. And let me know if you got questions or, you know. He said, and Jesus answered them, see that no one leads you astray, you know, blah, blah, blah. He gets through there and he talks about, you know, you're going to see wars, rumors of wars, you know, take place. Nation will rise against nation, kingdoms against kingdoms. There will be famines and earthquakes. All these things are but the beginning of the birth pangs. And then in verse 9, it says, then. See, the word then, that's an important word. Like, you're going to see all this stuff, but then, you know, they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. What happened to the disciples? Yeah, I mean, except for John, they all got martyred, and John got sent off to the island of, you know, Patmos. So he's talking to, keep Revelation 6 in the back of your mind. He's talking to that current age, that current time in history, those people. And he says, and then again, and then many will fall away. You get into around verse 15, it says, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, and we talked about that some when we went through Daniel. I don't want to go into a big thing about what the abomination of desolation is, except for they know what it is. And he's saying, when you see that happen, you know, and does everybody's translation have the parenthetical statement that says, let the reader understand? Yeah, what does that mean? I find that strange in scripture. You got a parenthetical statement. He says, you know, when you see the abomination of desolation happen, let the reader understand. You know, he's trying to emphasize, you better understand what this means. That means, you know, so if we're talking about that time, who would be the abomination of desolation and what character? You know, that would be Titus, the Roman guy coming in who's destroying the city. He says, then let those who are in Judea, you know, why isn't the whole world fleeing if it's the end of the world? You know, so let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. let the one who is on the housetop not go down and take what's in his house. Who of us live up on our housetop? We don't, nobody in the modern age, but they did back then. Yeah. And so then not go down, take what's in his house, and let the one who is in the field not turn back, take his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant and those who are nursing infants in those days, pray, this is an important thing, pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. Who cares about the Sabbath? We don't care about the Sabbath. I think I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. We don't care about the Sabbath. Heck, we go to college football games on the Sabbath, don't we? But the Jews there in Israel, that was a big deal because now they got to stop and think, wait a minute, if it happens on the Sabbath, am I breaking the Sabbath by traveling to get away? I mean, they held the laws that strongly, or at least the Pharisees put that pressure on them to follow the laws, that way. But like I say, I mean, Sabbath to us, I mean, if I'm getting out of town, I don't care that it's the Sabbath. We don't have that kind of obligation, let alone the rest of the world. For there will be great tribulation such as not been seen from the beginning of the world until now. And then pardon? Probably because it's cold and he just told you not to go back for your coat. It's hard to travel in the winter. I mean, I don't know that that's extra symbolic. I think he's just giving, warning. But for this judgment, think about this. What I just read, this is an escape passage. He's saying, here's what I'm talking to you. I think he's talking to the disciples, but we know he said they came to him privately. He's telling the disciples how to handle it. This is judgment coming on Israel, Jerusalem. He goes, but I'm telling you guys how to escape, like that. So he's talking directly to, to those people. Anyway, so we've got here, let me see. Okay, so go to verse 29, because this is what relates to chapter 6. He says, and immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Okay? Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. That language is almost exact to what's in Revelation 6, isn't it? To what's going to happen. And this is why this is important, is that, I got to find on the sheet that I gave you, the newer sheet that says the sun, moon, stars, and earthquakes and we'll talk a little bit about this next week because it'll be a shorter meeting because we have the business meeting, if we get to it at all. On how to read the Bible is to know that there's nothing new in the New Testament that's not in the Old Testament. So Jesus, when he talks about the stars are going to fall, the sun's going to lose its light, and the moon's and there's going to be earthquakes and all that, he has said that before. All these verses here that I've got here, and this isn't all of them, but what it shows is when God uses that language, he's judging a civilization. He's judging a people. He's not destroying the world. He's not making the world go away. And like I say, your dispensationalist groups, believe in a rapture and a tribulation period and a millennial where Jesus comes back there. Their whole thing is it's all future and it's at the end of times and it's the destruction of the world. But in Isaiah alone, the first couple of passages I have are Isaiah, but in Isaiah alone, God through Isaiah is calling down judgment on Babylon, then Assyria, then Philistia, Moab, Damascus, Syria, Ethiopia, Egypt, Babylon, Edom, Arabia, Jerusalem, Tyre, and then Israel and Judah in different chapters as you go through. He's calling down judgment on them, and he's using this apocalyptic literature, or wording. So if you look at Isaiah 13, 9 and 10 there, he says, behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation and to destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed light. This is a judgment against Babylon. Well, I mean, Babylon's sun didn't go out. Like they got their own sun, like it's just that language that is used in the Old Testament to show doom for a civilization. Okay. Same thing in Matthew 34. And also their slain shall be thrown out, their stench shall rise from their corpses, and the mountains shall be melted with their blood. All of the hosts of heaven will be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled up like a scroll. All their hosts shall fall down as a leaf falls from its vine, and as a fruit fallen from a fig tree. And this is, judgment against the nations. The nations are all the people that are against Israel. Okay? But again, when it says the heavens will roll up like a scroll, it's like there's no more heavens. It's just gone. Ezekiel 32, and he's talking here against Pharaoh and Egypt. In fact, in the beginning of chapter 32, it says, and it came about in the 12th year, this isn't in your notes, and in the 12th month, on the final day of the month, that the word of the Lord came to me saying, so these words of God coming to say against Egypt and against the Pharaoh, Son of man, take a lamentation over Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and say to him, and then we got what follows, and part of that is, when I blot you out, I will cover the heavens and make their stars dark. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon shall not give its light. So I mean, we got those verses. So do you get the idea that when it comes to when he's talking in Matthew 24, or if he's talking in Revelation 6, that he's not talking about the end of the world? It's not something off in the future. And then I'm going to carry out my wrath against you, and I'm going to destroy the world. That isn't what he's talking about in these passages. That doesn't mean he won't do that at the end, because you got other things that you have to, to read. I mean, I'm not expecting him to do that. See, you got to remember that all of the writings of the New Testament are anywhere from 30 years to maybe right up to the destruction of Jerusalem. They're all written before that. So when Peter talks about the earth burning up, because we usually want to associate, that's end times, man, the earth is going to burn up. No, I think he's talking about the city of Jerusalem is going to burn up. The temple is going to burn up. Your life is going to burn up. Your life is never going to be the same, again, like that, because he's always calling judgment down on Israel. He's not calling it. You won't find a place where he calls anything against, in the New Testament I'm talking about, where he calls anything against the nations, against the Gentile nations. He goes, they're already all, taken care of by their own, by their own actions. So, any questions about those verses? I mean, you can look them up in your Bibles and read them in the context that they come. And I don't know, I mean, I know in the couple of Bibles that I was using to write these down from, they have headings at each section. The headings are man-made written. They're not part of the, scriptures, but it'll say, judgment on Babylon, judgment on Philistia, or, something to that effect. But that's the language that Revelation's being written in. Okay. It's apocalyptic, and it's end times for those people that it's talking about. And so I think that's, that's important as we go, as we go through it. So let me see what I got there. Notes here. So in verse 12, it said, then he opened up the sixth seal. I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black, sackcloth, and the full moon is like, is like blood. And then, like I say there, we see that in those other chapters. Same thing with the stars, falling. Like I say, everything that you see here in the end of Matthew or Revelation is it's just the same. It's just the same thing like that. Now, what it means when you get further into the verses there, when you get to let me get my page turned here. Then the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and this is verse 15, and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. This is important. You got to remember, we said this when the four horsemen were being released. It's Jesus, it's the Lamb that's sending these things out. So these people, I think what he's predicting here is that when the destruction of Israel or Jerusalem and the temple happens, people are going to hide themselves because they recognize it's the wrath of the Lamb. The wrath of the one seated on the throne, that was the Father, and of the Lamb. And that was him opening, the scrolls. And it says, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? And I don't have the verses here, but Nahum and Malachi, the same types of language is used there about the wrath of God coming and who can stand. So back to we'll finish up with that, but back to my comment about in the New Testament there's nothing new. The only thing that might be considered new is Paul, I think in Ephesians, I don't remember, but I think it's Ephesians, talks about how the church was a mystery. Like nobody expected the church, like that. So maybe that's one thing. But my thought is that the Old Testament is the Bible. And the New Testament's the commentary on the Bible. That the New Testament explains what we couldn't understand or didn't understand in the Old Testament. That's why when Jesus says on the road to Emmaus, what did he tell those people to do? The two guys on the road to Emmaus. He didn't tell them to do. He explained to them everything in the Old Testament because it all pertained to him. Okay. And see, we know the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is true and all that, but we don't, until we become Christians, we don't understand that. So when you talk to, if you talk to a Jewish person, this isn't your common unbeliever, because a common unbeliever doesn't have the Old Testament, but the Jews have the Old Testament, but they don't read it. And so when you try to explain Jesus to them, they have no concept of what you're talking about. Like that, until they're enlightened. And that's what Jesus did with the two guys on the road to Emmaus. He explained everything that was in the Old Testament. And then what's it said? They broke the bread, they sat down to a meal, and he broke the bread. What happened? Anybody remember what happened?
They recognized who he was.
Well, he disappeared and they recognized who he was. And that's where, people get blind. Were you going to say something, Larry?
Yeah, that's basically what the Creation Museum and the Ark both try to do.
I'm sorry, what was the, oh, yeah,
both
right.
of them places actually try to explain the Bible and why Christ came.
Yeah. When, in Matthew, Jesus is talking about marriage, okay? And he says, as in the beginning, God created man and woman, and whatever, however else he finished off that, verse and all that. But he's giving that New Testament, can't think of the word, approval or whatever to the fact that God, back in Genesis 2, created man and woman and had them, whatever it was. But I mean, even Jesus is doing that in that same thing to give that credibility to the Old Testament. Because remember, that's all the people had. They only had the Old Testament. If they were when the Bereans, the Bereans checked out Paul, right? What did they check him out with? What were the scriptures? Well, the Old Testament. I mean, there was no New Testament. So whatever Paul's saying, they should be able to find in the scriptures, but they have to be enlightened by the Holy Spirit. Like that. I have for next week, I have a couple things. This is about knowing things why things are written that you read. I've got one, like, what's the story of David and Goliath? I don't want to answer it now. You guys can study it in the meantime, but what's the story of David and Goliath? Why do we have this story of this young kid coming and putting a rock in the forehead of a giant? We'll get into that a little bit last week. Like I say, just got a shorter time because we'll have a business meeting next week. Any other questions? But Larry, what you're saying is, and trust me, I believe in, I shouldn't even say, people say, well, I agree with most of what this person says or what this, I think I believe everything that the creation views, Answers in Genesis anyway, that's their parent group, what they put out like that. And they take a lot of heat from Christians, they take for taking the Bible literally. Yeah, so any questions? Anybody online? Question? Ray?
Yeah, just in reading the Bible and everything, isn't man under constant judgment from God? I mean, he's sending us all kind of warnings. He's giving us a book to read and understand and heed the warnings that he's sending. He told, Sodom and Gomorrah, he gave no warning to them. He annihilated them. But Nineveh, he gave them warning. Hey, if you clean up your act, I won't destroy you. And he didn't. Not then, but later on he did. And the same thing with all these nations that he took one nation to destroy another nation, to destroy another nation, to destroy another nation.
Yeah, but in Nineveh, he didn't give them warning. What was Jonah's message? It was only like 8 words.
Well, it was repent or suffer the consequences.
40 days, God's going to destroy you. That was the message. This is the way God works. That's why Jonah didn't want to get. See, Jonah probably would have said, well, if you told me, if you guys turn and become good people, God won't destroy you. But God's plan right now is to destroy you in 40 days. So he's giving you 40 days to get your, that isn't what it said. Jonah's message, like I say, I think it's 8 words in the Hebrew, or maybe it's 8 words in English and 5 words in Hebrew. I forget, but it was 40 days. God's going to destroy you. A whole message. He gave him no warning. It's just, but I think the other part is, I think mankind may be under judgment, but Christians aren't under judgment. I mean, I think that's the gospel, is that we've been taken away from that wrath of God. Like that. Now we can probably choose to go put ourselves back into it, which is the funny thing when people know the gospel and then they decide to leave the faith. They go, no, I think life would be a lot more easy if I just put myself under the wrath of God. That makes sense. Well, let me do Larry, then we'll do.
Are we sure that Christians, because some people, the word Christian can be kind of interpreted pretty liberal these days when people don't go along with Scripture.
Right. No. And if I say Christian, I am always talking some kind of confessional, creedal Christian who you could test them by what they say they believe. Last week I said, when you say Merry Christmas to people, everybody's got a different concept of what Merry Christmas says, because we want to, as Christians, we want to insist that we say Merry Christmas and that other people say Merry Christmas. But I think I pointed out last week, because I watched the video yesterday, is that you say Merry Christmas to someone and their reply might be, yeah, I like hot chocolate too. Because what do you do at Christmas time? You drink a lot of hot chocolate, and so, yeah, you're right, is that we need to make sure that we define our terms and what we expect, people see. And I have this argument with scientists or Christians who say they follow the science, and that's why they don't believe that Genesis story is literal, that the earth was, that everything creation was done in 6,000 years. I know to our modern minds that sounds incredible, and that it was done in the order that it was done and stuff like that. But then I go, are you sure you're a Christian? Because that's really not a statement of faith. I mean, what you believe, whether you believe old earth or young earth, well, even if you believed in evolution, you're just a Christian who's wrong. But when they say, because I follow the science, I'll take them to the other end and I go, well, do you believe in the virgin birth and do you believe in the resurrection? They go, of course I do. I go, well, science says to have a virgin birth is impossible. And they say, and to have a dead man raised from the grave is impossible. So why do you still say you believe in the virgin birth and the resurrection? And then I've had some of them, they'll tell me, well, yeah, but that's a faith issue. I go, so is Genesis 1. So is Genesis 1. Like that. And you know what? In the end, none of them ever agree with me. I mean, for some reason, our human mind, with the Genesis account and the science, statement about evolution, billions and billions of years and evolution, they just can't shake that as, no, that's the way, that it has to be. So people are fickle. What are you going to do?
A lot of people.
Do your microphone. Dennis is going to talk. You guys tell me if you hear him.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I give you a warning.
Yeah. Like, watered down an awful lot, like Larry says, everybody's throwing Christian around. It really should be Christian.
Right.
If you can enunciate Christ in that clearly, people look at you like you're pretty strange. What do you mean? No, I'm a follower and a believer in Christ. But they're tossing Christian around just like it's
Right.
and-
Right. Well, what we do in America is we say, well, I'm a Christian because I'm not a Jew or a Muslim, so I must be a Christian.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly. And also, I can't tell you how many people I've had say, well, I'm a believer. And I have, what do you believe?
What do you believe? In fact, that's the exact follow-up question you have to ask when somebody says, well, I'm a believer. And go, well, what is it that you believe? And you'll get all kinds of, we'll finish with, I was I was arguing with this lady on Facebook from Hamilton, Canada, Ontario. And, but she was going on about there is no God and this and that, evolution's true, da, da, da. But then I went on her Facebook picture and I saw, her pictures from Christmas, and had a Christmas tree and all that. So I said there, I go, well, at least it's good to see that you're celebrating and I put it this way, the Christ Mass.
Hey, Gene.
I don't think I've heard back from her. Yeah, Ray, and then we'll finish.
So wasn't the term Christian used by the Romans as an insult to people that were little copies of Christ?
Yeah, people originally called them Christians as a derision, like that. But it doesn't mean that, I guess the word Christ follower. But, Lutheran was the same way. When people were first called Lutherans, because it was a term of derision against those people. You guys are just like little Luthers, running around. Okay, we're done unless anybody else had. Oh, Jim, you got to go. What's that? We very well could be. Okay, so I'm asking you guys before I turn this off, was the sound better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, because we got another switch that we moved up higher. So I'm gonna end the recording. You guys